Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's a Monday morning. This will be my path forward as we continue reading through the book I wrote about my dad. It's called McDuff Lives, The Life and Untimely Death of Thomas F. O'Loughlin Jr. Did part one last Monday. It's still up there on all the archives on all of my channels. I am adding my YouTube channel back in so that folks who never migrated to Rumble won't miss the readings, because I do find this to be the heart of my mission here, to expose what my dad's life consisted of and to try to solve the mysteries left, as I believe that unfolding the mysteries of Macduff will unfold the mysteries of our nation. And the attempts against our nation are intensifying daily, even momentarily. I am most grateful to all the people who are working hard to get the message out that our country is definitely under attack. And it's not apparent yet in terms of bombs and missiles and planes, but the attack continues, and we are called upon to be vigilant to protect liberty. And that, I think, is the core of McDuff's mission as we go forward here on McDuff Lives. So thank you for being with me. I hope you had a good weekend. My wife and I went down to Washington, D.C. for one of our, it's unusual for us to travel downtown lately. We go down there maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Last time was to meet our good friend Andy Craig at the National Press Club and attend one of those events there. But that was almost 10 months ago. So DC, it's still there, but you have to peek in between the high-rise apartments and condos that are being thrown up everywhere in order to see the actual city as I knew it when I grew up. Well, we're 50 miles away now and happily living here on Mystery Island. And wherever you are, I hope you're safe and sound and healthy and out of harm's way. Just really hit me right in the heart, this horrible hurricane that tore through Florida, Georgia, and Western North Carolina. You know, the heartland of the South, the Appalachian homeland of so many of us, and the unusual nature of it and the incredible power of it that have still not even been revealed 3 days later, as the attention of our national government seems to be elsewhere. Yes, finally they did approve uh, a FEMA event that they're going to support now, and but state National Guard, sheriffs, and volunteers, and everybody that could pitch in has been working 24/7 for 3 days now, and the picture is really, really bad. So, your prayers and anything you can do to help, I personally appreciate. No, none of my friends or relatives are directly affected, as far as I know. But I mean, I know hundreds of people that moved down to Black Mountain, Swannanoa, Asheville to attend the wonderful atmosphere of music and dance that exists there. And these people are, still in danger. And I don't know really how bad things are. So anyway, back to the uh, the agenda for today, which is reading part two of the book I published back on June the 6th of 2021, the 50th anniversary of my dad's untimely death. And we left off with the two titans battling it out on the deck of the Nashville. Of course, these were not sumo wrestlers or Gene Tunney demonstrating his boxing skills, as he did on the USS Nashville, by the way. Um, these are Wild Bill Donovan, a general in the Army, uh, and Douglas MacArthur, a more superior general in the Army. But Donovan's task was to run the OSS, not to be a Army general so much. Nevertheless, as we learn from the biography of General Donovan, that he did visit the USS Nashville, and that date we have, and we are right there on that part of the book where I have just finished describing Donovan's meeting with MacArthur, and the upshot of it, of course, was that MacArthur would not allow the OSS into his area, the Southwest Pacific area, and we think with quite good reason, retrospectively. Um, and, as the old soldiers that would just fade away, said, there are those in Washington who would rather see MacArthur lose a battle than America win a war. As MacArthur had said, and those forces would have Truman's ear as the post war world took shape. Wow, we've been talking a lot about Truman lately and the way he was taken advantage of by certain groups, especially the military industrial complex and the Zionists. All right, let me get a sip of my Scottish tea, the Scottish blend of black tea that we picked up recently. It's really delicious. I'll be right back. All right, and I did skip a few of the pages devoted to the landings at various and support of the landings by the Nashville as a cruiser, offshore, providing fire support. That is, firing a whole lot of 5 and 6 inch shells at the enemy, while the uh, LSTs and LCTs are making their way to the various islands and deploying the soldiers through the Higgins boat ramp invented by General Krulak, who one day would be the Saxa, the boss of the whole McDuff operation for the last 10 years of his life. Bypassing Rabaul. Was a Japanese base for Navy and airplanes in New Guinea at the time, and that was a major base that it was MacArthur's job to attack and take down. But he had, of course, different plans, and so that's what we will be reading about here. We're picking up on page 20. MacArthur's brilliant move to Hollandia marked the important change in Allied war plans, the most important change in Allied war plans of the entire Pacific War. While Admiral King and General Marshall had opposed MacArthur's plan to return to the Philippines, the victory at Hollandia changed everything. With his forces far to the west of the main Japanese base at Rabaul and Nimitz and Halsey's campaign to the north of Rabaul, these forces of the enemy became virtually irrelevant. The Joint Chiefs approved MacArthur's plan, and he was on his way back to his beloved Philippines to keep a promise. Quote, the seizure of the Hollandia and Itape areas had consummated one step in the Southwest Pacific's strategic plan for the approach to the Philippines, advancing the land-based bomber and fighter line by the seizure of airbase sites along the north coast of New Guinea. Long before Allied troops had set foot ashore at Hollandia and Itape, General MacArthur's planners had been looking toward the Geelvink Bay region of western Dutch New Guinea as the next airbase site objective after Hollandia. From airfields constructed on islands in Gilvink Bay, operations still farther to the northwest could be supported. And that is a quote from the book The War in the Pacific by Robert Ross Smith, The Approach to the Philippines. May I mention also, I've just got an email from the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, Virginia, where my wife and I visited 3 years ago to give my dad's personal photography collection from the cruise of the USS Nashville to the archivist and historian there, James Zobo. Well, he copied them and put them into the permanent collection of USS Nashville memorabilia at the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, and you can go see them all there whenever the museum is open. But he says now on October 26th, just a month and a half from now, or less, just a month from now, there's going to be a major event celebrating the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And there will be two authors there of recent books that I haven't read yet about the Philippine campaign and MacArthur's strategy during the island hopping campaign that led to the Leyte Gulf landing. So I am really, really hoping I can make it there. That's October 26th. And if you want more information about that, go to McDuff. I'll get it right. MacArthur Memorial. MacArthur Memorial, and you'll see the notice there. Island hopping to Leyte Gulf. The successful landing at Hollandia gave MacArthur a new lease on life. Now, with General Marshall's support, he would have the ships and naval air support he had been seeking since 1941. The next target for his amphibious navy would be farther west again at Biak Island. MacArthur had been working on his plans for months. He wanted airfields from which to launch further attacks toward the Philippines. He mounted a series of quick invasions to get there, taking Wadke and then Biak Island, which proved to be the only possible operating base for the heavy bombers he needed. Fierce resistance was met on Biak Island. Nashville was bombarding the Japanese positions there when a torpedo nearly struck the ship on June the 5th of 1944. And then, of course, I put the picture of my dad, which you can just see on the internet anytime. Just Google. Oops. Yeah, I can't bring it in focus. I apologize, but this is my dad on the bridge of the Nashville with General MacArthur and General Kinney, and they are observing the landing. He's got the binoculars on October 20th, 1944, the day of the landing at Leyte Gulf. MacArthur's string of victories swung the opinion of Supreme Allied Commander General Marshall toward MacArthur's plan. With secret intelligence from breaking the Japanese code, he knew where to strike. The MAF, that's the MacArthur Air Force. No, I'm not sure what MAF means. Sorry. Maybe we'll find out. This is my own book, and I can't remember what MAF means. The MAF landed the soldiers and support personnel in subsequent island invasions, following their own established procedures of preliminary aerial photography, naval bombardment, rockets launched from converted LSTs, aerial bombing runs, and rapid deployment of naval engineers to buoy the route to the beaches. With full support of the Joint Chiefs, MacArthur proposed to reach the Philippines by Christmas. The island of Morotai was next. It was the last island needed by MacArthur for his return to the Philippines. MacArthur took Morotai in September, and on October 10th, with MacArthur aboard, Nashville steamed toward Leyte Gulf, the great harbor that was key to the Philippines. And here is a quote from the diary of Colonel Rufus B. Thompson, Colonel Thompson, a Marine who was the head of the Marine contingent of the USS Nashville. And if you want to learn more about the Marines, look up this gentleman. He did a video showing the whole uh, a big map showing where the ship went, and his accounts are they're priceless to me because I don't have any other really written accounts of from the people that were on the ship, uh, except for the very, very important book called Humble Heroes by the son of one of my dad's shipmates. And that, of course, I have a reference to that in the end of my book, so let me not neglect to do that. It is, I can't find it. I'm sorry. The name of the book is Humble Heroes. And gosh, if I got it right here. Oh well, this is live video, folks. There's no way I can avoid making little errors like that. So I guess I don't have it at hand. But anyway, it's a great account, personal observations of a son of one of my dad's shipmates. Humble Heroes. And here's a quote from Colonel Thompson's diary. We were so crowded aboard that some of the Army staff officers and news correspondents had to bed down in the wardroom or in passageways. An Army colonel shared my stateroom with me, alternating or hot bedding, as we called it, to catch a little shut eye. Most of the time, I found it cooler to go up topside and sleep on deck. As we sailed along with accompanying destroyer escorts, we were passing what seemed like an ocean covered with ships and boats of all descriptions, all heading in the same direction, the Philippines. There were troop ships, LSTs, LCMs, LCIs, tugs, tenders, PT boats, etc., you name it. Larger vessels were towing some of the smaller craft. The trip was uneventful, and upon arriving off Leyte Gulf on October 20th, we provided preparatory gunfire support for the landings. We repelled several high altitude Japanese bombers with our heavy anti aircraft batteries. It was interesting that the five main battery turrets had been tied into the AA directors so that those 15 6-inch guns could be used as AA weapons, anti aircraft, of course. To my recollection, we didn't down any bombers, but several were scared off. We remained at sea until the 24th, when we entered the Gulf and anchored near the town of Tacloban. The next morning, President Kazan and staff came aboard to greet General MacArthur, and then both went ashore for MacArthur's triumphant return to the Philippines. There were three separate occurrences of significance in the Leyte operation. One, the naval action in Leyte Gulf the day before the Battle of Surigao Straits. Two, the disposition of the USS Nashville during the Battle of Surigao Straits. And three, the Nashville dispatch to support the Jeep carriers under attack by the Japanese fleet in the east of the Philippines. Unquote. That's from the diary of Colonel Thompson with the Marine contingent on USS Nashville. So they not only had the Marines, they had all the Army officer staff from MacArthur's entourage. Due to General MacArthur's presence aboard, Nashville was not permitted to participate in the Battle of Surigao Straits, which was part of the overall landing at Leyte Gulf, in which the Navy destroyed the Japanese force attempting to impede the landing. With MacArthur now disembarked, Nashville was tasked to lead the convoy from Leyte to the next target, the island of Mindoro, where the Sixth Army would be landed on its way to Luzon and the capital of the Philippines, Manila. As flagship of the Mindoro attack group, the Nashville was leading what was called the slow tow convoy. the slower transports and landing craft needed for the invasion. Kamikaze attack. Japanese kamikaze attacks had begun during the Leyte Gulf operations, and the Navy was well aware of the extreme danger posed by these flying suicide planes and their bombs. Yet the risk had to be taken. It was Nashville's fate to be the next victim. Ah, and here's the reference to Humble Heroes How the USS Nashville CL-43 Fought World War II by Stephen George Buston, page 133. And here's the quote. The Nashville was almost directly in the center of the task group 78.3, well within the protective screen of destroyers, but also within four short, quick air miles from a tiny island off the southern end of Negros Island. The routine complement of Condition 2 crew, that is, half crew on, half crew off, manned the guns and lookout stations while extra crew members were on deck to enjoy the weather. It was a travel poster Pacific day, electric blue skies with some low cloud cover, beautiful Pacific scenery, spotted with scores of harshly painted, jagged warships. Glenn Miller's Tuxedo Junction was playing on the ship's intercom when lookouts spotted a Japanese Val fighter at 5,000 feet suddenly turn toward the Nashville. Men watched in horror as they recognized two 500-pound bombs under its wings as the plane headed straight toward the ship. Unquote. When the plane hit, its bombs exploded and gasoline fires raged furiously. Tom O'Loughlin, bomb disposal officer, had also trained as a firefighter, and now he would go into action. Quote, in roughly 90 seconds, the quote fog fighting equipment, that means firefighting equipment, was on the scene. 15 hoses were on the scene topside in less than 5 minutes. Fires on all decks were contained in less than 10 minutes and were completely extinguished in 20 minutes. According to official U.S. Navy reports, the ship itself was saved by the heroics of its crew. After the fires were extinguished, the wounded bandaged, and the ship stabilized, the damage was assessed. 133 of Tom's fellow sailors and Marines had died instantly. Entire gun crews had been killed. An additional 190 men of the crew of 500 were wounded. How many lives were saved by Tom hauling them up in his huge arms and carrying them gently to safety will never be known. The fact is, Tom never spoke about the war, and it was not until long after his death that we learned about the kamikaze. The men of the Nashville were indeed humble heroes. Pardon me. You know, another interesting point of history that I always like to share when I talk about this part of the book, because the Nashville had been, of course, right off Tacloban City, as stated earlier, during the landing, and then uh, it went to the port there at Tacloban to transfer the wounded to the hospital there on the Philippines. And at the same time, Doug Valentine's father was had been imprisoned in the Japanese prison camp at Tacloban for I think over 2 years. And Doug Valentine's father being there when MacArthur comes and liberates that prison is another one of the most compelling things that I have learned in this journey of discovery of my dad's life. So the Nashville returned to Tacloban City in Leyte Gulf to transfer the wounded to the local hospital. Tom was charged with running the repair crews as the ship made its way back to the United States for extensive repair. The ship returned to action and continued fighting until the war ended, serving as flagship of Admiral Berkey in the attack on the Japanese-held island of Borneo. MacArthur was again with Nashville at this last major landing and again commended the ship and its crews for the service with the simple resounding words, "Well done." On August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered. The Nashville was ordered to China to be the flagship of Task Force 73. Commanded by Admiral C. Turner Joy, it would now lead the famous Yangtze River Patrol, which had long protected Western countries' interests in Shanghai. In Shanghai, Tom bought a little wooden box to hold his small coin collection. It was later a part of our childhood, a treasure chest only opened on special request by us children. We played with the coins and delighted in opening the secret panels, which revealed a false bottom holding the key needed to open the box. I had kept that box long after Daddy died, but one day it disappeared from my home. It was one of many objects that would disappear from my possession during the ensuing years, objects connected to my father, gone in various intrusions into my home over the years. Parentheses, also, although some of the break-ins were investigated by the police, no culprits were ever found. These thieves were quite good. They even took the guest book from Tom's funeral, where attendees signed the names and the flag, signed their names, and they took the flag that had been draped over Tom's coffin. I say that because this part of my story, and the idea that I could say that people have been sneaking into my house to steal things connected to my dad over my lifetime s- sounds like I might be a little paranoid, doesn't it? But if you understand the context as I'm trying to explain it, it all makes perfect sense. That the idea that my dad is to be disappeared, and that is the way I see it, and that is why I wrote this book, and that is why I want you to get a copy of it and try to help preserve the story of McDuff. Tom was detached from USS Nashville after 2 weeks in Shanghai to become assistant professor of naval science and tactics at the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, Michigan, for one semester while he applied for a regular Navy commission. Two of his former captains, Captain H.A. Spanagel and Captain Atherton McCondray, gave him strong recommendations. Tom had planned to make the Navy his career, but serious trouble loomed at home involving his father, and as a result, he felt compelled to decline the commission he was offered. The family, quote unquote, called him home to try and help them deal with his father. For the next 3 years, Tom lived at home in Hartford while attending the University of Connecticut School of Law, graduating in 1949. Life at home was difficult with his alcoholic father, Tom Sr., in the throes of his illness. Tom Jr.'s best friend, Joe Russo, had become an army doctor and was away treating the survivors of the Japanese prison camps, Corregidor and the Bataan Death March. Tom no longer had a close relationship with his Uncle John, who had mentored him. It was Uncle John, the employee of Hartford Fire Insurance Company, who had tried to control Tom and steer him into a legal career among the white shoe law firms that worked for Connecticut's elite. Now, 3 years later, by 1949, he wanted freedom from the family and its constant pressures. He had fought a war for our freedom. Did he not deserve it himself? Why the FBI? J. Edgar Hoover, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had been waging a war against the enemy within since at least 1934, when President Roosevelt directed him to investigate all fascists, Nazis, communists, etc., who might be security risks. In 1939, Roosevelt announced to the nation that the FBI would be the lead agency investigating espionage cases for the United States during the war that began on September 1st, 1939 in Europe. In 1940, President Roosevelt created the Interagency Intelligence Committee to lead such investigations and to coordinate domestic, Army, Navy, and FBI intelligence. Hoover would chair the committee. Domestic intelligence, with additional jurisdiction over all of South and Central America, became Hoover's domain during the war. FBI versus CIA. The CIA had been created in 1947 over Hoover's vehement objections. Wild Bill Donovan, lobbying for the creation of the CIA, had directed his most articulate deputy to make a presentation to President Truman. Ultimately, the effort succeeded over Hoover's objections. That deputy was Allen Welsh Dulles. To Hoover, Allen Dulles was an ineffective, womanizing, disorganized egotist. Even Wild Bill Donovan agreed with Hoover on these points. But after a few false starts, the CIA got underway. At its head would soon be Allen Dulles, Director of Central Intelligence. There would be war between these two titans, Hoover versus Dulles, the FBI versus the CIA. Tom would have sensed the coming battle for control of national intelligence. As a law student, he would have kept himself informed by reading the Hartford Courant newspaper and other periodicals. The Alger Hiss case had dominated the headlines. Soviet spies in America was the topic of the day. In fact, the war against the enemy within had been raging for most of Tom's youth since President Roosevelt ordered J. Edgar Hoover to wage such a war in 1934. Tom would become a peacetime spy for America by joining Hoover's FBI intelligence service. He made his decision and joined the FBI. Following 12 weeks at the FBI Academy, and that, of course, is in Quantico, Virginia, right across the river from here, a little bit north, Tom's first assignment was in Atlanta, Georgia. Mary Elizabeth Libby Riddle was the youngest of three children in the Riddle family. Her father, Cornelius, was from North Carolina. He had served in the First World War and was wounded by shrapnel on the day the armistice was signed. He and his best friend, Watson, traveled together on the train to Atlanta. At the train station, they met two sisters, Flossie and Hetty Griffith. The two couples were married not long after. The Griffith sisters had come to Atlanta with their family as a result of the flooding of their home in North Georgia in connection with creating the Tennessee Valley Authority. The TVA acquired their family home and flooded the area in order to create electric power. And they said it was, of course, for rural electrification. Well, perhaps, but the real reason, as we know, was the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Flossie and Cornelius Riddle survived the Depression while raising their three children, son C.G., daughters Madge and Mary Elizabeth. We don't have a similar story to relate as to how Tom met Libby. We know they met in Atlanta and were married in October 1951. The wedding in a Catholic church in Atlanta was attended by the bride's extended family and friends, but no one from Tom's family attended. Tom and Libby spent their honeymoon traveling through the southern Appalachian Mountains and up the Blue Ridge Parkway to Washington, where Tom had an apartment. To help the Riddles understand where their daughter would be living, Tom took photos of Libby in front of Washington, D.C.'s Mall, the building around it, and the monuments and statues which still adorn the city center. Washington had a reputation as a cold and difficult place to live. Tom hoped the photos would help to take them he borrowed the FBI's Leica. It's likely that J. Edgar himself would have loaned it, such a camera being quite expensive. And I included one of the many really nice photos that my dad took of his bride in 1951, Libby O'Loughlin. My mother, she died in 1994, a little over 30 years ago. Tom the photographer. We've seen how Tom kept two kinds of photos from the war, a set printed on thin paper and probably done by an official ship's photographer, and some much nicer prints which must have come from a camera Tom had, or at least had use of during the Nashville's cruises, photos he would have printed in Sydney or elsewhere. We also know that Tom had attended bomb disposal school in Southeast Washington before graduating from midshipman school at Columbia. Actually, it was after graduating, correction there. It's possible that he also received additional training which was connected to intelligence. The Naval Photographic Lab was within walking distance of the DC Fire Academy where Tom trained. MacArthur and other commanders needed photographic interpretation experts. Tom would be assigned to the 7th Fleet, where aerial photography would become crucial in preparing for landings on enemy held islands. And that is a reference back to what I read earlier today about MacArthur's detailed plans for how to work the landings in the Philippine campaign. A second indication is found on Tom's separation affidavit from the military, where, when answering the question, what would be your most appropriate assignment should you be reactivated in a national mobilization? He answered number one, afloat, an officer on a cruiser, or number two, ashore, an intelligence officer. Tom's photos are of exceptional quality, both technically and artistically. At the FBI, he was entrusted with the bureau's Leica camera. He was on MacArthur's flagship where photo recon missions were interpreted. I think it is reasonable to infer that Tom had been an intelligence officer in MacArthur's Navy. Well, it's a little thin on the evidence side, but they didn't speak about it, did they? So, and then of course, with his future career in intelligence with the FBI and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's easy to look back and say he must have been an intelligence officer along with his other duties on Nashville. Tom and Libby set up housekeeping in an apartment on Minnesota Avenue, Southeast, in the Anacostia section of Washington, D.C. Tom knew that area from his time studying there in 1943 at the Fire Academy and the Navy annexes. He had friends in the Congress Heights Fire Station. It was close to downtown, but perhaps more importantly, it was inexpensive. I was born a year later in October 1952. It was in August of that year that Tom was assigned the project that would occupy him for the next 2 years by J. Edgar Hoover, reviewing the quote, application files, unquote. The application files, described as, quote, individual application files, unquote, there were ultimately nearly 68,000 such files reviewed by Tom and his team of agents and clerks at the FBI's Washington field office, located on the 5th floor of the old post office building. In 2020, I had the opportunity to ask investigative journalist Wayne Madsen his opinion of what these applications were. He agreed with my suggestion that these were applications for visas, most likely a person sponsored by the CIA, but subject to review by FBI before admission to the U.S., likely from Eastern Europe, he opined. While Tom and his team were reviewing applications, J. Edgar Hoover had much on his mind, especially the knowledge that the Soviets had the nuclear bomb and the fear that they might smuggle one into the country and detonate it, This was a time of paranoia. A doomsday weapon was in the hands of an enemy so determined to win that they would stop at nothing, not even Armageddon. New father. Tom enjoyed his early years as a father. Tom and Libby added my sister Lisa a year later. Tom enjoyed taking photographs of the family and also pursuing his love of poetry. We moved to Prince George's County, Maryland in 1953, just before Lisa was born. And then I quoted a poem that my dad wrote. It's dated October 5th of 1955, and I will read it to you. A sober 30. Johnny is 30 months tomorrow, and still I have not mastered proper grace to match his small dignity. We have a daily ritual, an early tea time, with graham crackers and hot chocolate for two. Sipping, not gulping, you understand, is the order of the hour. And the conversation must never deal with trivialities like returning toys to to their appointed places, but rather, let us say, with the awesome significance of the white fire engine we saw this morning. The men were clinging to the sides, wearing raincoats and their heroic hats, and we had seen the hoses and the axes, and the bell sounded just right. Still, the white did not belong. It violated the prescription of his library, as well as his clear recollection, and so was not to be accepted without challenge. Perhaps this coming 31st month will provide a resolution, but for the present I must school myself to measure with studied care the cocoa, to receive with serious continence serious conjecture, and to resist the enchantment of his long-lashed eyes. Tom did not like the work he was given reviewing the application files. Once it was complete, Mr. Hoover gave Tom his choice of assignments, and he chose counterintelligence. We now understand the 50s as the era of the Cold War. Defeating America's enemies in battle had only opened a new front in the fight to preserve the United States' freedom from foreign domination. Communism was a deadly enemy that was subverting our nation's institutions and our government. Director Hoover was ready to condemn anyone with communist associations, and he was especially alert to communist influence in our government itself. Hoover identified to President Truman several very high-ranking Americans as communists. Harry Hopkins, now deceased but a close advisor to FDR, Averell Harriman, Dean Acheson, Robert Oppenheimer, and many more. However, these men were not card-carrying communists. Only with Hoover's trained eye could their actual communist beliefs be seen through their actions and their associations. Just as actual card-carrying communists were identified. It was the communist belief system itself and not the membership in the party that Hoover detected. And he warned Presidents Truman and Eisenhower about these men, along with the lower-level spies he identified. Isn't that interesting that I look now and try to sort out who's on what team, and Averell Harriman is one that uh, I've always I've always considered him to be kind of well a Harriman, right? But the Democrats, why are the Democrats going with you know the Harriman family? Um, uh, the idea that Hoover was calling them communists back in the 50s, you know, I think he was right, but that's just my opinion. Growth of the CIA. The CIA was growing rapidly. President Truman rejected Wild Bill Donovan's attempt to become the first director in favor of his deputy. Allen Dulles ascended to become the DCI, and after a short period under Admiral Sidney Sowers and General Bedell Smith, Dulles took the CIA in hand and immediately began running covert operations, the very thing Truman had not wanted to happen. Furthermore, Dulles used his lawyerly skills and his establishment contacts to defy the president's intentions and proceed with his, quote, fun and games, unquote, as he called it. Dulles and the CIA used covert operations to overthrow popular governments in Central America, Iran, in Indonesia, and elsewhere in order to install dictators friendly to American corporate interests. In other words, Dulles and his CIA worked for the same clients he had served before and during the war at the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell. And by the way, I read a great portion of the book, uh, A Law Unto Itself, the story of Sullivan and Cromwell, a book, um, a hardback book I have over on the other shelf. And you can find my readings by just going into the archive of any of my channels. I think it's on all of them. Grandpa. Our grandfather, Tom Sr., visited us twice a year. He showed up once with a puppy, a Weimaraner, who we called Rudy. Rudy was at first not a welcome addition for Mama, who had to manage the household with two young kids and now a fast growing, gangly dog. But she took up the challenge and trained Rudy. He became a champion at AKC events, for which Mama and Rudy won various awards. But Grandpa brought another challenge with him, his drinking. Mama explained it to me many years later. Grandpa had shown up at the house for a visit, bringing some whiskey with him. Upon being invited inside, he produced his bottle and offered a drink to Mama. Her response was an ultimatum: stop drinking or never see Johnny again. To his credit, he agreed. He completed a rehab program and graduated, forever wearing a special wristband which warned emergency workers not to use alcohol in case of injury or illness. From then on, he visited us sober and seems to have kept his pledge until old age. I never saw him drunk. He was a wonderful grandfather for the rest of his life, riding us often and calling us regularly. He drove a Mercedes Benz like all the members of the family, with vanity license plates with his initials TFOL. Like all the members of the family, with vanity license plates. Oh, I'm sorry, like all the members of his family. After he retired from his career as a school principal, he became a snowbird, traveling in his Mercedes to Florida every winter, stopping with us on the way down and the way back, always with gifts for us and with new stories to tell. He had a happy disposition. He loved to play cards and tell jokes laden with dry Irish humor. He was a character. Grandpa. Grandpa graduated from Catholic University in 1919, as I told you last reading, and the first person in our line to have a law degree, but never used it. I think his lifestyle just interfered with his ability to pass the bar, or maybe he just plain didn't want to do it. Having felt the pressure from the family, the church, the society, the powers that be, one characteristic that Grandpa has, that my dad Tom has, and that I have myself is I don't want to be part of that. I want to. I want to be free. I want to live in a way that our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence speak of freedom, and I want to pursue happiness. And his best of his ability, I think my grandpa pursued happiness, and so did my dad, and so do I. And I hope you find your happiness too. Thanks so much for being with me this morning. It's an emotional book for me to read, of course, and but it was just terrific to be able to share it with you for this past hour. All right, tomorrow I'll see you with the great Harley Schlanger, and we'll be talking about world events together as we always do every 2 weeks right here at McDuff Lives.